Well, the lack of resources in Victoria, as you just heard, over the Christmas and New Year period was a cause for concern, and that's despite the federal government encouraging large-scale testing. Meanwhile, as case numbers spike again, there are more calls for the government to roll out a vaccine much sooner than March in any case. Well, to discuss all this, I'm joined by Victoria's Shadow Health Minister, Georgie Crozier. Shadow Minister, thanks so much for your time.
Good evening, Corey.
Now, you weathered the storm of 180 odd days in lockdown in Victoria. Have you seen a radically different approach, or is it just more of the same?
Well, that's right. Victorians went through a huge scenario of where we were devastated through the hundreds of Victorians who tragically lost their lives, and the months and months of lockdown that really devastated so many livelihoods and disrupted so many people's lives. So Victorians have bared the brunt of the mismanagement of the Andrews government and the failures of overseeing the management of this virus for some months. So it's been disappointing that we're just seeing more shambolic processes and the chaos that's gone on over the last few days with the border closures.
Yeah. Well, how have Victorians responded in this case? I mean, after going through so much hardship in the initial COVID outbreak due to the mismanagement of the Andrews government, I have to say that, are they responding favourably? Are they still thinking he's saving them from a terrible fate, or are they turning on him and thinking, hang on, mate, you're really not up to the job?
Well, Corey, that's right. I mean, Victorians do not want to go back into lockdown. We just have suffered so much because of what happened during the second wave, and that lockdown that, as I've just described, devastated so many livelihoods, and so many people lost their lives and their jobs. And the decision the government made at 3:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, those Victorians that actually got that message really wanted to get across the border so that they didn't go into self-isolation or hotel quarantine. They didn't want to go back into lockdown. They don't want to cause a third wave. But what we saw was a very rushed process by the government. It was chaos, it was shambolic, and so many Victorians have just been so frustrated because they are trying to do the right thing. The government's been demanding that they all be tested within 24 hours, and yet there isn't the infrastructure there to be put in place. So I think Victorians have done a fantastic job in trying to do their part, but the government has certainly failed in delivering what they needed to in relation to meeting those demands that they've put on the community.
Well, what's the role here of the Parliament? I mean, did the Labor Party and the crossbenchers surrender any input from the Parliament by giving the Premier emergency powers? Surely there must be an ability for you and your team to try and force the government to be better prepared for what is only going to be an expected outbreak and recurrence of coronavirus. It's not going away after all.
Well, correct, Corey. I mean, until we've got a vaccine, until we've got people vaccinated and the virus is under control through those measures, we've got to expect outbreaks. We know that. We know how this virus is transmissible. We all understand that. But you can't shut people down like they did in Victoria, locked us down. I mean, the government had to. They couldn't control the virus, so they had to control us, and they locked us down, and up to 23 hours a day. And we were in the Parliament asking these questions and saying, well, where is the health advice? And again, I'd like to see the health advice of the New Year's Eve decision. What happened between the 11 a.m. presser and the 3:30 p.m. presser, where the government made the call to shut the borders? Something happened between 11 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. And if you look at the logic of what the government is saying, then with all these clusters and outbreaks that are invariably going to occur from time to time, then our borders may never reopen. So we need to understand, I think, as Victorians, we've been through so much. We have every right to ask these questions in the Parliament, to demand why the government is putting these decisions upon the community and have that health advice. But we simply can't get it. It's not forthcoming. They will do their daily presses. They will tell Victorians what they want them to hear, but they won't actually provide the evidence and the information, the data that they're basing these decisions on.
But surely, as a shadow minister, this has been the time-honoured cooperation in times of national emergency or in times of state emergency, that there would always be health or appropriate briefings provided to the opposite number in the sense of looking for cooperation. Are you meaning to tell me that you've approached the government and they've refused to provide any further information other than what's publicly available or they state at their press conference?
Well, we asked, could you please provide the evidence as to why you've made these decisions? Where is the public health advice? The government continually says we're making these decisions based on expert health advice. Well, then we're asking, please release it. And I take that New Year's Eve example as a case in point, because at 11 o'clock, the acting Premier and the Health Minister stood up at a press conference. And then at 3:30 in the afternoon, the acting Premier held another press conference and made the decision, or announced the decision, to close the border to New South Wales. Now, that was so rushed. Where is that health advice that they are relying on to make that advice? Because that was actually putting people's lives at risk. That was very dangerous. People had started celebrating New Year's Eve. They had to make a decision, do I drink and drive and get across the border, or do I stay put and then I'm in isolation, which is what many did. And now, of course, they're in self-isolation for 14 days. Our families have been split up. Some are in hotel quarantine. Some are trapped out on the other side of the border. I mean, it is just chaotic, Corey. And I think Victorians have a right to understand exactly what that information was that the government received from the health experts as to the reasons why they rushed that border decision closure, or that border closure decision. And I think that's important to give Victorians confidence.
But I happen to agree with you, but can you just tell me, you talked about the acting Premier. Where was the Premier while all this was happening, while Victoria was shutting down for business again?
Well, the Premier, Daniel Andrews, is on leave. He's been on leave, for, I think, since just before Christmas. I'm not begrudging anyone taking leave, but I would make this observation that certainly when the Prime Minister was on leave last year, various individuals were really having a go at him. Well, they're silent presently. And we've got a real crisis here with tens of thousands of Victorians have had their lives turned upside down, disrupted tremendously, and they're quiet on the Premier. So I'm not begrudging him taking his leave, I might add, but I think there is a degree of hypocrisy going on there, Corey.
Oh, there's certainly a degree of hypocrisy, because it doesn't matter what the issue is, it's about the side and who you're cheerleading for, about whether it's right or wrong, and we've seen that in this case as well. Shadow Minister, thank you so much for breaking your leave. I do appreciate it. I know you've got Victoria's interests at heart, so stay with it, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Corey.